Alrighty, today we got a lecture on the Roman Empire, and what I'll do is they'll take you from the rise to the fall. So here we go. To start out, let's start with geography, because that's like a good place for us to start when we talk about the Romans. So Roman geography, things to know: the Tiber River. So if we studied other cultures, right, we've talked about the Indus River Valley people, right? We've talked about the people of Mesopotamia and how they used their two rivers, right? The Euphrates River and the Tigris River. So you've got an idea now. People settle near rivers, and a lot of that has to do with farming and agriculture. The Romans also kind of blended and mixed that together by thinking, okay, let's be near a river, but let's also be near the hills. And so they have the Alps to the north, which provide a natural barrier, just like the Himalayan mountains provided a natural barrier for the people of the Mauryan and Gupta empires, right? And then the seven hills kind of create this, ability for you to see the enemy before they see you. And so there's a difference here. When we talk about the Greeks, right, mountains divided the Greeks. When we talk about the Romans, the mountains kind of create this isolation to the north, but the rest of the geography within the Italian peninsula actually kind of unifies the people together. And so you have this kind of opposite element of geography here. You have unity. So there you go. It's like a really cool vision of the Alps, right? And then you've got the rolling hills down below. This is like the image that I think would help you understand that unity factor. So, forerunners of the Romans. When we talk about the forerunners of the Greeks, we were talking about the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, right? So here we have the people of Latium, where we get the Latin language for the Romans. Okay, so the people of Latium are one group. The Etruscans would be the second group, and those group of people are going to give the Romans the idea of the Roman toga, their legionnaire structure. So they structured it very, very much planned, methodical, and the idea was you'd always keep reserve troops so that you could deploy them wherever there was necessary battle and conflict. And the legionnaires are going to fight with the gladius sword, like a short, narrower sword, but a little bit more broader. The third group, so if you had the Latiums, you had the Etruscans, and now you have the Greeks, right? And the Greeks are going to influence everything from the alphabet to the style of architecture, right? So if you look at their polytheistic culture, you have everything from Zeus to Jupiter. They just basically take the Greek gods and then spin them into Roman names. Socially, the Romans keep it somewhat simple, right? There are four major groups. You get the patricians, who are the wealthy. You get the plebeians, who are the poor. And those two groups are going to be competing with one another. And that competition is going to play out when we talk about Julius Caesar somewhere down the line. Okay. Legionnaires. There you see their gladius sword. That gives you a better idea of what a gladius looks like. There's the military equipment, right? So you have your legionnaires, and then you have your slaves. And often slaves are going to fight as gladiators. And you'll watch in the film Gladiator, where these are slaves fighting for the entertainment of the masses. In the Colosseum, of course, is where many of these battles took place. Now, that's the most famous one. There were others throughout the empire, and the idea was to appease the crowd and get people to watch this, vicious sport play out. It's violent stuff, guys. We've talked about this in class before, but just recalling that, remember, this is a polytheistic people. They do not want people to be monotheistic. They want them to be polytheistic, and so they would feed the Christians to lions in the Colosseum. Let's talk about gladiator culture a little. Gladiators, they're owned by people, right? They're owned by a lanista who manages their fighters. You'll see in the film Proximo is the lanista who owns Maximus, right? And gladiators are fighting because they want to earn their freedom, and they're also fighting for a measure of fame that is akin to how we treat our athletes today. There's like this worship of athletes, right? And there was a lot of worship of the gladiators. So the gladiators were so worshipped that you would get like gladiator sweat in a jar, and they thought that that was like an aphrodisiac or a love potion. So people were like so excited to like get some gladiator sweat. They're like, oh my gosh, I got some. And I know that sounds really gross and what have you, but that just gives you an idea of who these gladiators were. They weren't just forgotten slaves. A lot of them were almost on that celebrity status. And some patricians who owned a lot of debt would become gladiators so that they could get rid of that debt and restore their honor. So it's a little bit more complicated. All right, government structure. So if the Greeks developed the direct democracy, the Romans developed the republic. Basically, the way a republic works is you vote for somebody, okay, and that somebody makes decisions for you. So in America, we have a republic, right? You vote for a senator. That senator represents you. Same thing for the president, right? You would vote for a president in America. That president then goes out and makes decisions for the rest of us. The Romans did the same thing. So the Romans would create a office called senators, and then these people that were senators would make decisions for the rest of the Roman Republic. And scholarship has argued for a long time that we are not quite a democracy. We are more of a republic. We don't all, as citizens, make decisions on a daily basis. We vote for people, and those people make decisions for us. So we're closer to Rome than we are Greece. I hope that makes sense. The Senate was made up of 300 patricians. If that number sounds familiar, the 300 Spartans that stood at Thermopylae. It's kind of a nice tie-in there. And then the plebeians eventually created their own council called the Council of Plebs, which is like really funny. The Council of Plebs would make decisions on a more localized level. So that's more like, how we have governors. It would be more of that locality level, or mayors, something like that, maybe. But the patrician Senate is going to make up the big part of Roman government. It's the patricians that make most of the decisions. And what Rome would do is they had kind of like two presidents. They called them consuls, okay? The consuls, two of them, would make decisions, especially in times of war. So the consuls would kind of switch off during war. So like one would lead the army one day, and then the other guy would lead the army the other day. And it was supposed to like balance power out. But in times where Rome was threatened, where Rome had like, a horde of barbarian tribes coming down to like take them over, they would nominate a dictator, and the dictator would come in, and it was not a bad office. It wasn't like, oh, dictators are bad. It was actually seen as like a noble office, like, oh, you're going to become the dictator and save us, right? And the idea is you'd become dictator, you'd make the decisions quickly, efficiently, and effectively, and then what you would do is you would hand off power once you were done. So an example of someone who became a dictator would be Cincinnatus. He gave away his power afterwards and went on and retired. Another example would be a guy named Julius Caesar who decided not to give away his power. And I will talk to you all about that someday. By the way, if you've heard of Cincinnati in Ohio, that's the connection there. Okay. Other things. The Romans used praetors. Praetors is a system where basically, if you're a praetor, you are like the high judge. So we have a Supreme Court in this country, right? So we have 9 Supreme Court justices that make decisions on a big federal level for everybody. Same thing here. They just had 2, and they called themselves praetors. They were the people of justice. So consuls, more like a president. Praetor, more like a Supreme Court justice in that way. And they operated under the 12 tables, which becomes like Hammurabi's code, kind of like an eye for an eye sort of thing. Very brutal law code to keep people in line, kind of similar to that legalist idea of Shi Huangdi. They're all sort of building on each other. Strict, harsh punishments to keep the people in line. The 12 tables are part of that idea. And they are posted everywhere so everyone knows what the rules are and knows what the laws are. Simple, efficient, and effective. At least that's how they started. They get way more complicated as Rome gets bigger. All right, so why was Rome successful? They used that phalanx system, very much like the Greeks did. So you can kind of see it there. Longer, taller shields, of course. And they also were known for brutality. It was not enough to obey your commander, but it was to function as an entire unit, right? And if one person was weak, they punished everybody. So if one soldier decides to like run off, right, be a coward, he's looking at the field and he's like, I don't want to rush at this catapult that's shooting at me, right? What would happen is they would go through a process called decimation. So your leader of the legion could initiate decimation. So they'd have everyone line up, and every 10th soldier would be punished, and punished through death, punished through violence. But the idea is that they would take out 1 out of 10 soldiers and do something horrific to them, oftentimes killing them. And that just sort of sent a message like, Roman legionnaires don't run, they don't hide, we continue to fight to the last man. Other reasons why they were successful: their brutality, surely, that's one. Their weaponry, the gladius, that's two. But like another one that was really interesting is the Romans function as soldiers and engineers. Like they're both simultaneously. So what they would do is anywhere they went, they'd build a road, and that would allow you to quickly and efficiently move your troops. And if some little city-state decides to rebel, the Romans could send their legionnaires back and crush them quickly. They also had this road system similar to the Persians, right? The royal road, where you could collect tribute quickly and efficiently. So the ability to be an engineer allows you to build these roads, to build fortifications, to quickly cross rivers and streams efficiently and quickly. This is an army of smart, intelligent men. This is not just brute barbarians, okay? Now, is the process of decimation a very barbaric thing to do? Absolutely. But these people are also people that are thinking wisely and saying, you don't need just to be a soldier, you need to be an engineer too. You need to be able to build. So wherever a Roman army went, a road would follow. Okay. They are masters of this technique there, the siege technique. Basically building covered ramps to be able to get over the high walls. That's how they're going to take your city. So this is like, brand new style of warfare where you're able to get to the enemy when the enemy thinks that they're hidden. Now, the Romans were not known to be great at building boats. Okay, they weren't like the best at that, kind of like the Spartans. They'd rather fight on land. So they said, let's make a sea battle a land battle. So they developed something called a Corvus, which is also a raven, right? And the Corvus would allow them to board ships. You would use it as a battering ram, and then they would throw down the ladder-like structure, and that would allow you to board other ships, and you would basically make a sea battle into a land battle. So you're playing to your strengths, right? Your men are good at land battles, so let's get them fighting in a way that reminds you of land battles. So that's your background. That's the things that you should know about Rome, their culture, okay, how they developed with their geography. You should know something about how the Alps kind of contain them, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to see this play out in action in what is kind of like the world wars for the ancient people. They call it the Punic Wars. And it starts in the south there, if you see on the map, where you have Carthage right at the bottom here. And this will be the place where everything goes down. And it's going to be this like sort of, method where they're going to come up and around and through the Alps. And we're going to be talking about a people led by Hannibal and the Carthaginians. So here we go. Hannibal of Carthage was born to a father who was waging war against Rome. Okay, the Carthaginians to the south had fought against the Romans, and the story goes that Hannibal's father made him pledge that he would never be a friend to Rome, made him take a blood pact right inside a shrine to one of the Carthaginian gods, and he said, never be a friend of Rome, promise me that, promise me, Hannibal, you'll never be a friend of Rome. And so Hannibal decided he was going to live a life where he never did. The details of Hannibal's father's death are a little hazy, and many people say that he died drowning. And if you think that that's like, impossible, you got to think of the armor that these guys were wearing. It just makes it harder to move, harder to get through water. So when Hannibal's father dies, it's like, well, who leads this army? right? Who fights. And at the time, they were stuck in Spain at the time. So the army looks to young Hannibal by birthright to lead the army. And he's got this idea. Instead of hitting them the way that the Carthaginians had always done, they'd hit them from the south. They used their boats. They would take the boats to the south, and then they would fight. Instead, he's like, what if we could hit them where they never expect? Let's take our war elephants, we'll put them on boats, we'll bring them across, and we'll march all the way up to the north through to the Alps. And he does. He crashes down through the Alps, okay? Comes through the North Pass. And with these elephants, he takes the legionnaires by surprise. They are not expecting this northern invasion. They're not expecting the fury of Hannibal. And they're not expecting this new strategy he had. So they meet at this battle. It's a famous battle, really, of the ancient world. It's the Battle of Cannae. And at the Battle of Cannae, what the brilliance was of this, military strategy here is that the Roman legionnaires, they're in red. They're like in a block formation there on the left-hand side. So this is like your legion on this side, right? And then on the other side, you have got this crescent strategy, almost a reverse crescent, if you will, where you've got this sort of line that reminds you of a crescent, right? And that was the strategy. So basically what would happen is the legionnaires pushed forward, and what Hannibal did is he put his best soldiers on the outside, including his war elephants on the outside. So his best soldiers on the outside, and then his weakest in the middle, and he actually told his weakest, meet them in the field, and then begin to back up, okay? Give ground, intentionally give some ground. And meanwhile, what will happen is your best soldiers will outflank the Roman legionnaire. And when they get outflanked, if you start to see it, what starts to happen is the Romans will get surrounded because the outside fortifications, the outside cavalry literally does a sweep around the legionnaires. And so pretty soon what happens is the legionnaires are fighting on all sides. They're being hit from the left, they're being hit from the right, and then they've got this middle section to deal with. So the crescent strategy gave the illusion that the Carthaginians were losing early on. And so the legionnaires would get really excited, oh, we got them on the ropes. And then meanwhile, they don't realize it, but the cavalry is closing in from each side. They're circled, they're enveloped, they're destroyed. What Hannibal did was amazing because he showed that a smaller force, if deployed correctly, could defeat a larger force. He had less numbers and yet defeated a infantry that was better trained than he had, right? But just couldn't execute the plan the way that Hannibal could. Shows his smarts, shows his leadership, and shows his forward thinking. So that's Hannibal's crescent strategy. Now, the Romans are being defeated. They are being attacked place after place after place, and they're trying to figure out, how do we get to Hannibal? And this is where the story turns really dark. The Romans, led by Scipio Africanus, were trying to figure out where was Hannibal's weak spot. And they figured it out. They figured out that Hannibal had a brother, and that his brother was over in Spain, and so the Romans sent assassins, and they killed his brother. But they did worse. They took the brother's head, brought it back over, rolled it into Hannibal's tent, and Hannibal was furious. He lost his mind. And so in the next battle against Scipio Africanus, now he's angry, right? He wants blood. He wants revenge, right? It's his brother. And so he sends all of his war elephants out in front. He massively puts out this charge and just goes, right? So this time the Romans know, he's not fighting with that crescent strategy. This time they're going to be victorious. They let the war elephants roll by, and they actually form spaces in their ranks so that the elephants will just run right by them. And then they pick off the archers on the top of the elephants, take the elephants, and run them back at the Carthaginians. It's a massively successful strategy. Hannibal ends up losing much of his forces. He asks for more help, more soldiers. The Carthaginians will not give it to him. And so Hannibal is sitting there. He's a defeated man. He ends up being recalled back to Carthage. He's worried that the Romans are going to send assassins after him. And so what he does is, rather than allow the Romans to take his life, he takes his own life through poison. He has a Socrates moment, right, where he decides, I'd rather die by my own hand than ever let a Roman take my life, right? Never be a friend to Rome. And in the end, his rage has consumed Hannibal. So be able to fill out this story card. We'll do it in class for sure, but this is a good story card to know, right? Never be a friend to Rome. Make sure you know about the war elephants, the Battle of Cannae and the Crescent strategy. Know something about Rome and the assassins that come, the brother that's killed, his temper, his fury, right? His weakness ends up being his temper. Okay. So, recapping the Punic Wars between Carthage in the south and Rome to the north. You've got Carthage as the navy supremacy. Okay, they're like the Athens of this story, right? And then you've got Rome, who's more of the military, strategic powerhouse. They're more of the Sparta in this story. And they call it the Punic Wars. It's Latin for Phoenician, and Phoenician people were the forerunners of Carthage. So it kind of just helps you understand why they would call it that. It's long standing that Carthage was settled by the Phoenician people, got sort of taken together through cultural diffusion, became Carthage after. All right, so that's like the World War II of ancient peoples, the Punic Wars. And there were 3 of them, but ultimately it is the Romans that went out. Here's a look at what the Infantry of Hannibal looked like. They had a lot of different people from a lot of different areas. That kind of shows you like more cultural diffusion. They're taking on a bunch of groups of people and making one army, which is awesome. The war elephants are a famous tactic of Hannibal, and they were pretty effective, by the way. They crossed the Alps using those elephants. So the northern mountains, the Alps, we should really know that, right? I've used that word a couple times. We talked about the crescent strategy. That shows you that a smaller force can defeat a larger force. And I really like this graphic because it just shows you like how the crescent sort of envelops around, circles around the forces. Like you really see it, right? When you put your strongest warriors on your flanks, you're able to really, really get around and push around. Okay, so there you go. And Hannibal chose to take poison rather than be caught by the Romans. So please know something about that. All right, so once the Punic Wars are over, you get an empire, right? So here's the empire. Rome's going to conquer all of Greece, what they call the Hellenistic states. Remembering they call them the Hellenistic states because the Greeks refer to themselves as Hellenes. So that's where you get that term from. Rome's going to conquer the Gallic people. The Gallic people are the people of modern-day France. They'll conquer the Celtic people of Britain, and they'll dominate that Mediterranean Sea once the Carthaginians are defeated. So they've got it all, right? They have dominated Europe now. And we're going to look at how the Gallic people are conquered in just a little bit with Julius Caesar here. And his famous quote is, Veni, Vidi, Vici, right? I came, I saw, I conquered. And that's what he's going to do. His story starts out as a boy in the Mediterranean Sea. He's on his way to a little island called Rhodes. Along the way, the boat is seized by pirates, and basically what happens is his father, he's a praetor, so they know he's got a lot of money. He just didn't have a lot of money on him. So they take young Julius and they are going to ransom him. They're going to ask for ransom money from his father. His father's got to get the money together. And he is in a pirate alcove, like a pirate camp, with a bunch of the most cutthroat dudes around. He is, at this time, something like 12 years old. Okay, you imagine yourself at 12 years old, right? A couple of years ago. So not too long ago. You got the toughest of the tough men who are looking around. They kill for a living, right? And they've got Julius inside a cage, and they go over to Julius and they're like, so we're going to ransom you out for 40 talents, which I guess had, a pretty good sum of money at the time. And Julius behind the cage looks him in the eye and says to this pirate, famously, he says, 40 talents? No, I'm worth at least 100. He says, and oh, by the way, stone-faced staring at these guys, murderers, right? He says, I'm gonna come back here someday with my legion. He says, and I'm gonna make sure to crucify each and every one of you. Now, crucifixion was a thing that the Romans did to pirates. Okay, that was a very common thing they would do to pirates. But to say that within their own camp, looking at them, is like this different kind of boldness, right? So when he says something, he means it. Julius Caesar eventually gets out of this pirate encampment. His father pays the ransom. And what Julius does is he obsesses over being in the legion. He obsesses over commanding, and eventually does. He becomes a commander in the legion army because, well, his father's a praetor. It helps to know people. And one of the first things he does as a legionnaire officer is he goes out and brings his legionnaire soldiers to that pirate camp. And you know what he does, right? He goes to these pirates, and one by one he crucifies them. And he says to them as he's putting them up to be crucified, he says, well, I'll make your death quick. And he cuts their throats before he crucifies them because he says to them that he is merciful to them, right? He's merciful. Different people, guys. Just remember that. I'm teaching you about different people. This is not, modern people, right? This is a different breed of human being. So now Julius Caesar has got a name for himself. He is known by his men as the type of leader that he would not say, hey, let's go take that hill. He would actually go take that hill himself, right? He would be leading the charge as opposed to just telling you where to go. This is a different level, and his men loved him for that he would fight alongside them. It was kind of typical that legionnaire officers would kind of point and, tell people where to go. They were the brains of the operation, but Julius was more willing to fight with his men, which I think was really cool and inspirational for sure. As Julius is growing more powerful, he needs to realize that this is first costing him a lot of money to wage these wars. And number two, he's got to keep the Senate happy. So what he does is he finds the two most powerful people in all of Rome. And what they form is something called the Triumvirate. It is a trio that is, famous in world history. And it's the three people that unify the Roman Empire and for a time are the baddest three people on the planet. So Julius Caesar's got the army. Pompey is well known and well loved in the Senate, though Pompey did know how to fight a little. And then Crassus has got the money. So when you think of money, or think of Crassus, think of a big bag of money. Like he's the richest man in all of Rome. So you've got Moneybags Crassus, you've got the Senate and Pompey, and then you've got Caesar who's got the army. And that trio forced together is going to make for a really, really powerful group, the Triumvirate. So now he's got some money. Now he's got support from the Senate. So what he does next is he decides, I need to continue to make a name for myself. I need to conquer something. And at the time where he wants to go is he wants to go to the north. He wants to go after these Gallic tribes to the north who had been in a process of revolting and trying to kick out the Romans. They were tribal group of people who said, enough's enough. We really don't want to be a part of this empire, right? And they were led by a king named Vercingetorix. So he goes up to the north with his army. And he goes in and he fights against this Gallic people. And I'll go back for a second. And as he's fighting against the Gallic people, the king Vercingetorix tells his folk, he says, burn everything. And they're like, what? Like, burn everything. Let's starve the Romans out. Burn everything. And so Vercingetorix is going to try to burn and destroy his own land so that Julius has nothing. And when Julius hears and sees that he is doing that, he loses his mind. He goes on a campaign that is what one can only call genocide, right? He kills every Gallic man, woman, anybody he finds, he's killing them, right? This is total destruction. He says, how dare you try to starve my army? If it's war you want, it's war you're going to get. And goes on this murderous spree, eventually catching up to Vercingetorix. And the way that he takes his city is absolutely amazing. Brilliant, and it's got all this, building and builds a double barricade, like just so cool. But we don't have time to talk about that. So what we'll do is we'll say that he defeats King Vercingetorix, and in this defeat at the Battle of Alesia, when he's victorious, he takes Vercingetorix and he kills him in the worst way. He waits a year, so Vercingetorix is like just been rotting in prison, and then in front of his entire legionnaires strangles Vercingetorix in front of everybody to sort of show this like power over the Gauls. So now the Gallic people are defeated, but the rumors come back. Okay, word comes back to the Roman Senate, and they're like, "What is this Julius Caesar doing? He's out there strangling people. Like, what is going on?" And they realize like he's got this huge army. He's in the north, just destroying things. Like, come back, Julius, come back. But leave your army in the north. We want to talk to you. We want to figure out who you are. And it is a famous moment in world history where he does come back. He's going to come back to Rome. He is going to cross the Rubicon River. And it's like this, I don't know. It's not really a river, guys. It's really more of like a small little like creek that he crosses. But he crosses this little creek. It's in the north. And when he does that, basically it says like war is on. Like I am now defying the Senate. I am the new leader. And he comes in with his army, and the Senate immediately appeals to Pompey. This is, Pompey, you got to save us. Pompey, you got to help us. Like, you're the Senate guy. Let help us from this Julius Caesar cat. Like, he is totally gone on a rampage. And so Pompey tries to fight. He like wages a war against Julius, but Pompey does this war thing on the side. He's one of those generals that like tells you, hey, you do this and do that as a legionnaire soldier, and I'll stay back here. Julius isn't like that, and Julius's men have been fighting against the Gallic warriors. The Gallic warriors fought naked. They had, the bushy beard, long blonde hair, total just punk rocker looking dudes. And so when they're done fighting the Gallic people, they're like, yeah, no. Fighting against a bunch of people under the command of somebody who likes the Senate, yeah, you have no chance. And so they fight and they battle, and they're defeating Pompey's forces. Caesar has been victorious, and finally Pompey flees to Egypt. And when he flees to Egypt in the south, the Egyptians see this guy, Pompey, arrive, and what they do is they take Pompey and they cut his head clean off. Now, why would they do that? The reason is because they're afraid. They're like, we saw what the Gallic people went through. Julius was murdering them. We don't want that to happen to our people. So they cut his head off and sent it back as a present to Julius. And Shakespeare does this, and this is like a highly controversial thing, but a lot of scholarship and Shakespeare say that when Julius saw the head of his friend Pompey, because that's what he was a friend, he couldn't look at it. Now, could he not look at it because he felt bad that he had to kill Pompey, and this was like, a decision that haunted him? Did he feel bad because he saw himself becoming quite the monster? I don't know. I don't know why. And I guess we don't know that it actually happened that way, but maybe this is like just a play up that he's a merciful Caesar. I'm not really too sure, but I can tell you this. When he comes back to Rome, he comes back and he says, I am now the first consul. I am now dictator for life. There's one consul here, and we're going to call him Emperor Caesar. He has effectively taken away the power of the Roman Republic, taken away the power of the Senate. This is dangerous, but this is what Julius decides to do. As Julius is getting more powerful, he is giving land to the plebeians, okay? He is saying to the plebeians, to the plebs, that they should have a voice in government, right? More than just a council of plebs, right? He wants to weaken the power of the Senate. He does not think that the Senate should have all the power. And he thinks that he can, as one man, run Rome more effectively than the 300 senators. Highly controversial, right? So the senators go to his best buddy, Marcus Brutus. And Marcus Brutus, I know he looks crazy there, right? Marcus Brutus is in a position where he thinks that his friend, Julius Caesar, has taken too much power. And the Senate feels the same way, obviously, because they want their power. And so, and they're worried that they've like sort of, taken the power of the plebs and like given them way too much power. And so what they do is they say, Marcus, get him in a room. Just get him in a room alone and we'll take it from there. And so Marcus asks to meet Julius and they meet in the chambers and the Senate's there, but they're like kind of in a sort of like semicircle, like a crescent almost. It's kind of weird. And Julius kind of walks in and he's like, well, what's going on here? And Marcus asks him to come closer and he does. And he comes close and then they stab him 23 times. They stab him and they kill Julius Caesar. But when they did that, they didn't stop something, right? Like the empire had already been changed forever. Someone walked into that room and said, you can have an emperor in Rome. You don't need a senate. And from this point on, what's going to happen is civil war. What's going to happen is Rome is going to be changed forever with the death of Julius, okay? It immediately gets plunged into a civil war. So let's talk about it. The patricians definitely ignoring the plebs. They feel like they don't have to respond to the plebs. The generals are getting stronger. Case in point, Julius Caesar. So they're more loyal to the generals than they are to these patricians who seem to be so far away from the people. And the gap between the rich and poor is just becoming larger and larger and larger. And then Julius Caesar takes power and starts giving back to the poor. And it's like, everything's going to go downhill. We've talked about the triumvirate, so just know the three parts, right? You've got the army and Caesar, the Senate's got Pompey, Crassus has got the money. And know that Julius Caesar took all. The Gallic genocide, there you get a picture of Vercingetorix, okay, who looks really awesome in that picture, right? Like this total warrior king. And good luck spelling Vercingetorix. The Gauls often fought naked. We said that. They were taller than the Romans. So they're all bigger, and many of them are naked running at you. And it's like, whoa, that's like a jarring thing. But the Romans under Julius were able to defeat the Gauls. And there's King Vercingetorix there as a statue. The Gauls try to burn everything. So Caesar responds with genocide. If you didn't know what the word genocide meant, I've been using it a couple times to probably explain. It means intentional killing of a group of people, in this case, the Gallic people. This is a painting to the left, by the way, of the Battle of Alesia. I encourage you to look it up on YouTube. It's a really cool battle. It's a double fortification that Caesar uses. Just a brilliant guy. So once he defeats the Gauls, I should say, in the north, you get a situation where he's forced to come back to Rome. Caesar crosses the Rubicon without his army. There's the Rubicon, by the way. It's not much of a river, right? And comes back and says, I am first consul now. I am dictator for life. He's going to hand out land to the plebs. He is going to raise the pay for legionnaires. I mean, the Senate is angry. They're like, this guy, like, who is he? He's a traitor to his class, right? He was a patrician. His father was a praetor. Why are you doing this? Keep the plebs down at the bottom. Don't raise them up. But remember that many of the legionnaires were part of the plebeian class. So he's been with the plebs. He knows who these people are, and he loved his soldiers. You could say a lot about Caesar, but to say that he loved his men, I think is about as fair as you can get. So the Senate hatches a plot with Marcus Brutus. They kill him, stabbing him 23 times. And his death changes things. From here on out, Rome is not going to be just a republic. It will be an empire ruled by an emperor. And what we'll do is we'll study the Roman Civil War, and I'll show you kind of how this breaks down. So at this point, let's talk about the Roman Civil War. If I were you, take a quick break from my voice and then come back, and we'll talk Roman Civil War. If you still got the ears for it, I'm going to keep going. So here we go. Next, the Civil War is between Octavian, who was Caesar's nephew, and then you've got Mark Antony, Caesar's best general. So you've got snot-nosed kid versus hardened military leader, right? If you were to bet on this, if I were to bet on this, I would bet Mark Antony, right? let me show you why Mark Antony fails. Yes, it has to do with a woman by the name of Cleopatra. You see, Mark Antony falls in love with Cleopatra down in Egypt. He loves Cleopatra, wants to spend all of his time with Cleopatra. And so he does. And he stops fighting. He stops like focusing on this civil war that's outside, right? And so instead of fighting in the Civil War, he's like kind of delegating to his troops, like, yeah, go fight that Octavian kid, whatever, like do something out there. And so Octavian gets the opportunity to get stronger, learn a little bit, and eventually defeats Mark Antony's forces. And Mark Antony and Cleopatra eventually take King Cobra Venom and take each other's life, which is like the first Romeo and Juliet story in history, right? So there's that King Cobra. Ooh, scary looking beast. When Mark Antony dies, Civil War is over. Octavian wins. And what will happen is Rome's going to go through a period called Pax Romana. It means Roman peace. It means a golden age. It means that Octavian's now emperor. He calls himself Augustus Caesar, right? So Augustus means exalted one or like special one, right? And he's going to lead through some building arenas like the Colosseum, chariot races. They had naval battles in the Colosseum, which is really cool. He's lowering taxes because his idea is if we have lower taxes here, then you'll have more trade because people will be more likely to trade goods if they don't have to pay so much for them. He's going to build aqueducts. Now, I wish he didn't build them out of lead because, lead's toxic and that's not good for us. But he does have aqueducts to transport water, new roads, something like 50,000 of them, 50,000 miles of them. This is Pax Romana. It is all of the cool things you've heard about Rome, like occurring one after another after another. You get public bathhouses, you get latrines where people can use the bathroom, right? The idea here is that we're starting to see a city develop within Rome. Again, wish it wasn't made out of lead. Maybe that's why people went crazy. Here's the dome with the arches and the beautiful columns, some of which has got a lot of Greek overtones. And they established the guard called the Praetorian Guard, which you will see in the film. The people that have the purple cloaks on, that's like the special elite guard of the emperor. So there you go, Pax Romana in a nutshell. Let's finish with the fall. And again, I'm doing like speed teach here a little bit, but it gives you the pieces. It gets you to see where I want you to study. So why does Rome fall? Oh, there's so many reasons why Rome would fall, but we'll talk about a couple. So the patricians, they are siphoning off their gold and silver supply because they are buying so much from the Chinese and the Silk Road. And because of that, they have to coin more money to make up for all that lost gold. So they continue to coin more money and make more money. And the problem is that you get inflation. When there's too much in the money supply going around, I always say, like, when everyone's a millionaire, being a millionaire doesn't matter anymore, right? So they kind of let out too much money. And then you get the situation where you get politicians who are bribed. They're very corrupt. Good thing we don't have that today, right? You get terrible emperors. So, like, Nero literally burns down part of Rome, which is incredible. Persecutes Christians. I mean, just, he's a rough guy. Nero's going a little crazy. Caligula definitely was crazy. He decided to nominate his horse for sheriff, which, bold strategy, definitely bold, visionary, okay, but a horse probably, can't be constable, can't be a senator. He thought the horse could do both, apparently. Pretty wild guy. And so eventually the Praetorian Guard actually kills him because he was a madman, for sure. And then last was Commodus. And Commodus you'll see in the film. So when you're watching Gladiator, you'll see Commodus. Commodus is certainly what a wild man. He tries to make himself look like Hercules in all of his statues. He had an obsession with Hercules, thought that was who he was, and eventually is going to die by poison. So you'll see more of Commodus in the film. All right. What other reasons did Rome fall? Well, that Praetorian Guard's definitely corrupt, right? They are not trusting the emperor anymore, and they're often choosing who the next emperor would be. And then Rome did this thing that really, really got them. They trained their conquerors. That's what they did. They decided that paying all these legionnaires and continuing the process of empire building was just too much. So what they did is they started hiring out foreign tribes. And the foreign tribes would protect Rome against other tribes, right? That was the idea. But what starts to happen is they started to learn all of the strategies and fighting styles and techniques of metallurgy to build the baddest military in the planet. And then these tribes are eventually going to come down and they're going to take over Rome because Rome had taught them everything that they needed to be powerful. So these these tribes from the north are going to come down on Rome. And what Rome's got to do is sever itself. They realize that there's no way they can hold all the territory they've gained, so they quickly retreat from Britain, from Gaul, from Spain, right? And from even Rome itself. They have to give in as the I don't want to call them barbarians, but that's what the Romans called them, as these tribe of peoples come through and just push down into Rome. A guy by the name that they call the Sword King, or Spear King, comes down and just brutally sacks Rome. You get the Vandals, the Visigoths, right? All of these really cool tribes come down. And so the emperor at the time, Diocletian, has to divide his empire in half. And Diocletian starts with a D, divide starts with a D. So that kind of helps you remember that. So you got all these different tribes coming down, and eventually you know who's going to pop up. If you've got tribes coming down and you've got an empire that's collapsing, who's going to come down here? Of course you're going to find the Huns, and I will circle that for you, okay? The Huns are going to come down eventually as well, and you know, when the Huns come down, you know what's going to come down to your empire, right? Okay, and we'll talk about the Huns in just a minute. So all these tribes come through, they sack Rome, Rome retreats to the outside, they think we're going to hold off in the east and hold out as long as we can, but Rome is no more, really. It's different at this point. The Emperor Constantine, after a famous battle, is going to convert to Christianity. He says he sees a cross, a symbol of a cross before a battle, and he decides that that's the sign from God. And after fighting in the battle and being successful, he believes that the Christian God is now with him. So the Romans become monotheistic after this battle. They establish a city called Constantinople, which will be the subject of our next unit. Pretty cool stuff. Rome has fallen. Constantine is trying to save it, but Rome will never be the same. So that new city of Constantinople is shown, and if I could find it here and circle it for you, we'll find it here in like a purple. How about that? Come on, Casey, you can figure this out. Okay. So we've got Constantinople right here, and it's right at the tip where, like this would be like where Troy is, like right here, somewhere like that. So it's like north of Troy. You see where Athens is right here, so you're kind of like inside of Greece now, where Constantinople is, and they're going to pick a place where there's a lot of harbors and ability to, do some trading in the Aegean Sea and the Black Sea. But they have pushed away. They have divided their empire with Diocletian, and now they have become Christians and are living in Constantinople, at least what's left of the Roman Empire. This side is all, this whole, swath of territory that's in yellow is all going to be controlled by different tribes, Vandals, Visigoths, Huns eventually. And the Huns pour down into Rome, and they're led by Attila the Hun, one of the best warriors that perhaps history's ever had. He's on the level of Genghis Khan, right, in terms of his military success. And we've learned about this before. The Huns come through and empires fall. What other dynasty did we watch the Huns take over? You got it, the Han dynasty. So the Huns come down, they conquer the Romans officially. The Han dynasty fell to the Huns the same way, right? So there's some repetition here in history. So let's finish with this. What happens? The East lives on. The reason why Roman and Greek culture lives on is because of Constantine. He finds a way to hold on to Constantinople. He cuts that empire in half so it's easier to defend. In the east half lives on as the Byzantine Empire. Okay, they'll eventually change their name to Byzantium, but it's neither here nor there. They become the Byzantine Empire, and that is what the east is. It is the Byzantines now. So I won't really refer to them as the Romans. They refer to themselves as the Byzantines, so that's what we're going to call them from here on out. So with that, that was a lot of content all at once, but it's all good stuff, right? And watching Gladiator with Russell Crowe will give you a picture of the Colosseum and the Praetorian Guard and show you the corruption a little bit more. And I think you'll see Lenistas and you'll see the aqueducts and the Roman roads and all that good stuff. So guys, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And make sure to subscribe, please, 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 so you get all of these lectures right to you. Take care, guys.